She stepped onto the wrong boat at 8:30 on the warmest morning of the year, and no one on the crowded quay at Pentrith said a word to stop her. The tide was full, the harbour water flat and green as bottle glass, and every plank of the jetty breathed out tar and warm salt into the still air. Clara Linden clutched her portfolio against her chest with both arms, the way a woman holds the only thing she cannot afford to drop, and let a brown hand reach down and take her up over the gunwale. She was bound for an island. She had never once considered that there might be more than one. Steady, miss. The boatman's grip closed round her wrist, dry and hard as a rope's end. Mind the thwart. She's low in the water this morning. Thank you. Clara found the bench and sat, her half-boots planted among coils of line and a basket of something that smelled of green apples and beeswax. Gulls wheeled and screamed above the mastheads. Somewhere behind her a fish cart shed its ice with a hiss, and a child laughed, and a bell at the custom house struck the half-hour in two flat notes that shivered out across the harbour. You are certain this is the island crossing? I was told the 9 o'clock. The old man did not look up from the knot he was working. He had a face like a walnut and eyes the pale, bleached blue of a man who has spent 40 summers staring at water. This is the crossing to the island, miss. Only crossing there is today. That satisfied her, because she wished to be satisfied, and because the man behind her was already casting off the stern line, and the whole boat had begun to swing on the tide. Clara did not know, could not have known, that on the far side of the quay, past the fish cart and the ice and the stacked lobster pots, a second jetty stood with a second boat, blue-painted and half-empty, waiting on the 9 o'clock for St. Aubrey's and the modest grey house where a dowager named Lady Fenwick had engaged, by letter, a new companion she had never seen. Clara had that letter folded inside her portfolio, pressed flat against her drawings. She had read it so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. Miss Linden, the crossing to the island is weekly, the tides being what they are. Come on the Tuesday and we shall contrive to make you comfortable. She had it by heart. She simply had the wrong island, and the wrong boat, and a boatman who answered questions with exactly as much truth as they contained, and not one word more. You'll be for the house then, the old man said. It was not a question. He put his shoulder to the sweep, and the boat slid out past the harbour wall into the long swell, and the land began, quietly, to let them go. Fenwick House. Yes. Clara turned her face into the wind. It came off the open water clean and cool, and it lifted the loose chestnut hair at her temple, where the pins had already begun to lose the argument. I am to be companion to Lady Fenwick. Is it far? Hour and more, with this tide. He spat neatly over the side. You've the look of a governess about you, miss, if you'll pardon it. I have the look of a curate's daughter, Clara said, which is very nearly the same look, only poorer. She heard him make a sound that might, in a more generous man, have been a laugh. It pleased her absurdly. She had not made anyone laugh since Dover, and Dover was 3 days and 4 coaches behind her, and her father's small, anxious face at the vicarage gate was behind that. She opened the portfolio a hand's width, enough to be sure the water had not got in. Inside lay her whole fortune, a folio of botanical drawings in pen and washed colour, 3 years of them, sea campion and viper's bugloss, and the ragged blue heads of sea holly she had copied from a book she had not been able to buy, and had memorized instead in the bookseller's window over a fortnight of Saturdays. Under them, wrapped in oilcloth, her brushes, her little cake of Prussian blue, worn down to a sliver, and her father's second-best magnifying glass. A companion was paid £30 a year to read aloud and fetch shawls and lose gracefully at piquet. Nowhere in the letter had Lady Fenwick asked whether her companion could draw. But islands had flowers, and flowers did not care who was watching, and Clara meant to fill the white margins of her evenings with them until the folio was thick enough to carry her somewhere better than £30 a year. She closed the portfolio. The boat rose and fell, and she began, without meaning to notice things. The boat was too fine. That was the first thing. She had expected a fishing smack, blunt and reeking, and this was a trim silver-grey launch with fresh paint and brasswork that had been polished that very morning. She could smell the rouge on the cloth. The cushion beneath her, though faded, was velvet. And on the transom, where a name or a device had once been picked out in gilt, someone had scraped the wood back to bare grain. Recently, imperfectly, so that a curl of a letter still showed at the edge, like a word half swallowed. A crest, painted out. Clara looked at it for a long moment, and filed it away in the orderly cabinet at the back of her mind, where she kept things that did not add up. "Your boat is very handsome," she said. "For a ferry." "She's not a ferry, miss," the old man's oar creaked. "She's the houseboat. Fetches what the house wants fetched. And today the house wanted fetching a companion." He was quiet a moment. The water slapped and gurgled along the strake. "Today," he allowed, "the house is getting more than it's sent for." Which made no sense, and which she did not press, because the island had begun to lift out of the haze ahead of them, and it was wrong. She had pictured St. Aubrey's from the Dowager's letter as a snug grey place, a house and a chapel and a walled kitchen garden, the sort of island a person could walk round before her tea went cold. This rose from the sea like a green fist. Cliffs first, streaked white with birds, and above them a shoulder of gorse and heather burning yellow and purple in the August sun, and above that, set back where the land climbed to its highest point, a house. Not a snug grey house. A great one, long and pale, and many-windowed, with a stand of wind-bent oaks behind it, and, running down toward the water, the ruined bones of a garden, broken walls, a glass house with half its panes gone to silver blindness, terraces gone to bramble and bolted flower. Clara's arms tightened on her portfolio. "That is a very large house for a dowager." "It is," said the old man, "a very large house." The sun beat on the back of her neck. A cormorant broke the water off the bow and beat away low and black. She smelled, as they came under the lee of the cliff, the sudden green breath of the whole island. Hot gorse, salt, cut hay from some field she could not see. And under it all, sweet and dark, the smell of a great deal of honey. She would remember that smell for the rest of her life, though she did not know it yet. She only thought, bees. Someone here keeps bees. And then the launch swung round a black tooth of rock into a small stone harbour, and there was a man waiting on the jetty, and she stopped thinking about bees at all. He was hauling a net of something up the weeded steps. She saw the long muscles of his forearms take the strain, saw his shirt, open at the throat and rolled to the elbow, pull tight across her back, and shoulders built for exactly this kind of work. Sun-browned, dark-haired, no coat, no hat, a day's dark stubble on a hard jaw. A working man. A keeper, she thought, or the steward, or whatever a great empty house on a great green rock employed to keep the sea from taking it. He set the net down and straightened as the launch came alongside, and he looked at her, and his face did a thing she was too busy to read at the time, and thought about a great deal afterward. It changed. A flicker, surprise, held, and put away in the space of a breath. "Truin," the man said. His voice was low and unhurried, a voice that had never in its life needed to be raised to be obeyed. "That's not the flower." "No, sir," the old boatman shipped his oar. "That's a passenger." "I can see it's a passenger." The man crouched, caught the gunwale, and held the launch steady against the stone with one hand as easily as another might hold a door. Up close his eyes were a very dark grey, almost the colour of the scraped wood on the transom, and they moved over Clara once, her plain travelling pelisse, her clutched portfolio, her hat with its single honest ribbon, with an attention that missed nothing and gave nothing back. "Madam, you appear to be lost." "I am not in the least lost," Clara said, with the composure of a woman who has just privately begun to fear she is exactly that. "I am expected. Miss Linden, I am the new companion." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, He did not smile. He was, she would learn, a man who did most of his smiling with everything except his mouth. "The new companion," he repeated. "To Lady Fenwick." Clara lifted her chin. The stone harbour smelled of wet weed and drying fish and warm tar, and a gull screamed once, insolently, from the top of the seawall. "I was told the Tuesday crossing. It is Tuesday. This is the island. I confess the house is larger than her ladyship led me to expect, but that is hardly a fault I can lay at your door." There was a silence then that lasted a beat too long. The old boatman Trewin studied the sky with sudden fascination, and the man holding the boat looked at Clara Linden, and she watched him arrive at some private crossroads, and choose, deliberately, the road she could not see. "No," he said at last. "It is a larger house than you were led to expect." He offered his hand, a broad brown hand, hard-palmed, with a curious thing about it that her draughtsman's eye caught even as she took it. At the base of the third finger, a band of skin paler than the rest, the ghost of a ring worn a long time, and lately taken off. "Mind the step. The weed is treacherous when it's wet." His grip was warm and dry and absolute. He lifted her from the boat to the jetty, as though she weighed nothing at all, and set her on her feet on the streaming stone, and let her go at once, too promptly, she thought, for a man who wished to seem forward, and too carefully for a man who did not notice such things. "You have the advantage of me, sir," she said, steadying her hat. "You know my name." "Thorn," he said it flatly, the way a man lays down a card he does not much value. "I keep the place." "Mr. Thorn." Clara looked past him, up the tangle of terraces to the long pale house, shimmering in the heat. The ruined glass house threw back the sun in blind silver sheets. "You have your work cut out for you, Mr. Thorn. Her ladyship's garden is in a shocking state." For the first time the smile reached further than his eyes. It touched, briefly, the hard corner of his mouth, and it transformed his whole grave face into something a full decade younger and considerably more dangerous. "It is," he agreed. "I've been telling the owner so for years." Behind him, Trewin began to unload the net, whistling tunelessly through the gaps in his teeth. And Clara, who prided herself, quietly and to no one, on being the most observant person in any room she had ever stood in, catalogued the pale band on his finger, and the scraped crest on the boat, and the velvet cushion, and the honey on the wind, and the way the boatman had said "sir" to a man in his shirt-sleeves, and could not, for the life of her, make the sum come right. "Well," she said, "shall we go up? I should like to present myself to Lady Fenwick before I disgrace myself by fainting in her harbour. I have had nothing since Pentreth but a very cross-tempered apple." "Lady Fenwick," said Mr. Thorn, bending to shoulder the net as though it were a shawl, "is not at home." "Then I shall wait." Clara fell into step beside him on the path that wound up through the broken terraces, and the smell of hot gorse closed over them, thick as syrup. "I have become extremely good at waiting. It is nearly the whole of a companion's art." He glanced at her sidelong. The path was narrow and steep, and he shortened his long stride to hers without seeming to, and a bramble caught her skirt, and he freed it with 2 fingers before she had even felt the snag. "Is it?" he said. "That, and losing at cards, and pretending to admire needlework, and reading sermons aloud in a soothing voice." She was talking too much. She always talked too much when she was hungry and frightened, and determined to appear neither. "I do the sermons very ill. My father is a clergyman, and I have heard too many good ones to fake a bad one convincingly." "A curate's daughter," he said. "You told the harbour so. You were listening." "I listened to a great deal, Miss Linden." He said her name as if he were testing whether it would bear weight. It is most of what keeping a place amounts to. The path turned, and the house rose up before them all at once. 3 stories of weathered stone, warm gold, where the sun struck it, with tall windows standing open to the summer, and white muslin curtains breathing in and out of them like something asleep. A flagstaff stood bare on the roof ridge. No flag. Clara noticed that too, without knowing why it mattered, and stored it with the rest. A woman came out onto the wide, shallow steps as they climbed, small, upright, iron grey, in black bombazine, that must have been a torment in the heat, and that she wore as though weather were a thing that happened to other people. She had a bunch of keys at her waist, and a face that had plainly decided, some decades ago, to expect the worst of everyone, and had been only intermittently disappointed. Her eyes went to Clara, then to the man beside her, then to the net over his shoulder, and then, pointedly, back to Clara. "That is not the flower," the woman said. "No, Mrs. Pascoe." There was a thread of something warm and buried in his voice now, an old dry joke between them. "This is Miss Linden. She has come to be Lady Fenwick's companion." The keys did not so much as chime. Mrs. Pascoe's gaze travelled the length of Clara, the dust of 4 coaches on her hem, the clutched portfolio, the ribbon, the ink under her fingernails that no amount of pumice had ever quite persuaded to leave, and then returned to the man's face and held it, and something passed between the two of them that Clara could not read, but could feel. The way one feels a draught from a door in another room. "Did she?" said Mrs. Pascoe. "She did," said Mr. Thorne. "All the way from Dover, by her account, on a cross-tempered apple. I think we can find her some bread and butter before she faints in the hall, and I am obliged to explain the body to the owner." "The owner, Mrs." Pascoe repeated, with an emphasis Clara did not understand, and would spend a fortnight understanding. "The owner," he agreed peaceably, and set down the net on the top step, and rubbed once, unconsciously, at the pale band on his finger, and looked out past both women at the sea as if the sea might tell him what to do. "Bread and butter, Mrs. Pascoe, and the blue room, I think. It has the best of the garden." Clara looked from one of them to the other. Hunger and the long crossing had made her light-headed, and the honey smell was everywhere, and the muslin breathed at the windows, and none of it. The size of the house, the flagless staff, the scraped crest, the way this brown-handed man in his shirt-sleeves gave orders that an upper servant received without the flicker of an eyebrow. None of it fit inside the small grey shape of the life she had crossed 3 counties to take up. "Forgive me," she said carefully, "but I begin to think there has been some confusion. This is St. Aubrey's? Fenwick House?" And there it was again. That pause, that held breath, that private crossroads. She saw him weigh it. She would come to know the look so well, the stillness of a man who has just been handed, unasked, a small perfect gift he knows he ought to give back. "This is the island," he said. "You crossed to the island. There is only one crossing on a Tuesday." Every word of it was true, and not one of them was an answer, and he knew that she knew it, and he let the silence do the lying for him. "Sit down before you fall down, Miss Linden. Whatever else wants sorting will keep till you have eaten." He was right. Curse him. She was too faint and too far from home to argue, and there is a limit to how much dignity a woman can defend on an empty stomach at the top of a stranger's steps. She let Mrs. Pascoe steer her into a cool stone hall that smelled of beeswax and old roses and the sea, into a chair, toward a plate, and she told herself that the confusion would resolve itself, that Lady Fenwick would return by evening, that mistakes made in harbours are unmade in drawing-rooms, and that she would laugh about this by supper. It was not until much later, the bread eaten, the faintness past, the long light of the summer evening lying gold across the ruined garden below her window in the blue room, that she thought to ask the question that would close the last door behind her. Mrs. Pascoe had come to take the tray. Clara stood at the open casement with her portfolio unopened on the sill, looking down at the wilderness of the terraces, at the broken glass house catching fire in the low sun, at a tall figure in shirt-sleeves moving among the overgrown beds far below with the unhurried certainty of a man walking through his own dream. "Mrs. Pascoe," Clara said, "when does the boat go back?" "To the mainland." "I find I ought to send word to my father that I have arrived, and I confess The longer I sit here, the more certain I am I have arrived at the wrong place entirely, and I should like to put it right before I make a greater fool of myself." The tray did not so much as tremble in the housekeeper's hands, but her eyes went, once, quick as a bird, down through the window to the man in the garden, and back. "The boat, miss," she said, "goes when the house has need of it. And the tides being what they are, and the weather being set fair for a spell, and the supply not due till the Tuesday next," she settled the tray more comfortably against her hip, "I should not look to see Pentreath again this week. Was I you? There's no getting off this island but the one boat. And the one boat," she added, with the faint grim relish of a woman delivering a verdict she has been saving all afternoon, "answers to the master. Not to you, and not to me, and not, God help us all, to poor Lady Fenwick, wherever her ladyship may presently be. Down in the garden, the man who kept the place, who owned the place, who owned the boat, who owned the island and every grain of flour and every bee on it, and had not corrected her once, straightened from the bed he was clearing, and looked up at the lit window where she stood, and did not look away." And Clara Linden understood, with the cold, clean certainty that always came to her a moment too late to be of any use, that she had boarded the wrong boat, that no one on this island had the smallest intention of telling her so, and that she would not be leaving it for 7 days at the least. The gulls woke her before the light had properly finished arriving. Clara lay a moment in the strange bed with her eyes shut, listening to them wheel and quarrel above the roof, to the deeper wash of the sea against rock somewhere below, to a bee, one industrious bee, knocking itself patiently against the inside of the windowpane where she had left the casement fastened against the night air. The room smelled of lavender and salt and the faint green mustiness of a bed not slept in for a long while. She opened her eyes to a ceiling washed the pale blue of a hedge sparrow's egg, and remembered, all at once and with a small cold drop of the stomach, exactly where she was, and precisely how little she understood it. She got up. The floorboards were cool and gritty with a fine sift of sand under her bare feet, and when she crossed to the window and worked the stiff catch, the whole morning came in at her, hot gorse already, though the dew still lay silver on the terraces below, cut hay, tar, and threaded through it all that dark, sweet river of honey she had smelled from the boat. She freed the bee. It hung a moment on the sill, then dropped away down the wall toward the wilderness of the garden, and she watched it go and thought absurdly that it at least knew its business, which was more than she could presently say for herself. She dressed quickly, pinned her hair with more severity than hope, and took her portfolio under her arm. She would not leave it in a strange room, in a strange house, that answered every plain question with a held breath. Then she went to find someone to argue with. Mrs. Pascoe was in the stone hall, polishing a long case clock that had stopped, Clara noticed. At some hour it had evidently been content to keep for years. The brass pendulum hung dull and still behind its glass. The housekeeper's cloth went round and round the case top all the same, patient as tide. "Good morning, Mrs. Pascoe." Clara set herself squarely on the flags. "I have slept. I have eaten your very good bread, and I have decided to be sensible. I should like to write a letter to my father, and I should like it to go on the next boat, whenever the master condescends to send one. Will you give me paper and a pen, or must I ask him myself?" The cloth stopped. Mrs. Pascoe turned, and her sharp black eyes went over Clara the way they had the evening before, taking inventory and finding the total, as ever, wanting. "You may write your letter, miss. I'll not stop you." She folded the cloth into a precise square. Whether it goes is another matter, and not mine to settle, but there's paper in the little parlour, and ink if the ink's not dried to a stone by now. "Through there." She nodded at a door. "Mind the pictures. Mind the, I beg your pardon?" But Mrs. Pascoe had already turned back to her stopped clock, and Clara, after a moment, went through the door. The little parlour faced east and was full of mourning. It had been, once, a pretty room, a woman's room, she saw at a glance, in the faded rose of the walls and the work basket still sitting by the window, with a half-finished piece of embroidery, gone grey, with dust across its hoop. And on every wall, in their gilt frames, the pictures. Portraits, a dozen of them at least. Every single one had been turned to face the wall, so that the room looked out at nothing but the brown paper backs of a family's whole history, each one neatly labelled in a copperplate hand she could not read from across the room. Clara stood very still. The bee hum came faintly through the glass. She crossed to the nearest frame, and, because she had never in her life been able to leave a thing turned to the wall, she tilted it gently out and looked. A young woman looked back at her. Fair, laughing, painted in a gown the sharp clean blue of harebells, with a spray of the same flower loose in one hand, as though she had just that moment stopped to pick it. She was beautiful in the way of women who have never once had to wonder whether they were, and across the bottom of the frame the copperplate read, in ink gone brown as old blood, a single word, Isolde. I would not, if I were you. Clara did not startle. She had heard the floor take his weight in the doorway a half-second before he spoke. She was already learning the particular quiet of him. She set the frame back to its wall with the same care she had taken to lift it, and turned. Mr. Thorne stood filling the doorway, a coat on this morning at least, though open, and his dark hair still damp at the temple from washing, and his face wearing the shut, courteous blankness she was beginning to understand, was the thing he put on the way other men put on a hat. Then, you should not have left them for anyone to find, Clara said. A thing turned to the wall is the loudest object in any room. You may as well hang a placard on it. Something flickered far back in the dark grey of his eyes. You have a philosophy of hidden things, Miss Linden. I have a philosophy of everything. It is the curse of a small income and a large curiosity. She lifted her chin. Who is Isolde? The name landed in the room and lay there. Outside a gull cried, and the embroidery hoop stared up from the work-basket with its one grey unfinished rose, and Clara watched him decide, once again, exactly how much of the truth the question deserved. She was the mistress of this house, he said at last. Every word set down flat and level, like stones across a stream. She has been gone 3 years. Her ladyship prefers the pictures as they are. Now, he stepped back to let her through the door, and the courtesy of it was a wall as much as a kindness. You wish to write to your father. Come and write it in the library, where the ink is not a fossil, and I will see it goes to Pentreath the first fair chance. I do not keep my guests, Miss Linden, whatever Mrs. Pascoe's dark hints may have led you to fear. I only fail, sometimes, to correct their misapprehensions as promptly as I ought. It was so nearly an admission that she stopped in the doorway and looked hard up into his face. And is there a misapprehension of mine, Mr. Thorne, that you have failed to correct? For a moment, one whole held moment, she thought he would tell her. She saw it move behind his eyes, the whole shape of it, whatever it was. Then his mouth did the thing it did that was not a smile. The bread, he said gravely. You appear to be under the misapprehension that yesterday's was good. It was 3 days stale. Mrs. Pascoe bakes on a Tuesday, and you arrived on the wrong end of the week for it. He turned down the passage. Come, there is fresh this morning, and honey, if you have the courage for it. She followed him because the alternative was to stand alone in a room full of averted faces, and because she was honest enough with herself to admit it, walking behind the broad set of his shoulders down a corridor, hung with more frames, all turned the same shameful way. Because when he had said, honey, if you have the courage for it, something at the hard corner of his mouth had very nearly, for the first time, invited her to laugh, and she had wanted to, and she distrusted, deeply and on principle, any man who could make her want to laugh before she had had her breakfast. The honey, it transpired, wanted courage, because the getting of it did. He walked her out to it after she had written her letter, a short, bright, lying little letter that told her father she was safe and comfortable, and said nothing whatever of wrong boats. Because there are worries a curate 3 counties away can do precisely nothing to mend, and should therefore be spared. Thorne took the folded sheet without reading the direction. tucked it inside his coat against his heart as though it were his own. And then, instead of leaving her to the long empty morning, he said, "You smelled the bees from the water." Truin told me, "Come and meet the cause of it, and then perhaps you will stop cataloguing my house with your eyes and catalogue something that will not lie to you." "Flowers lie constantly," Clara said, falling into step. "The prettiest ones are frequently poison. Then you will be perfectly at home here." The bee garden lay behind a wall of warm, crumbling brick on the sheltered south side, where the ruin gave way suddenly to order. The one square of the whole wilderness that someone had refused to surrender. Here the beds were dug and weeded and rioting with bloom, borage and lavender, and great mounded thyme alive, and shimmering with the low roar of 10,000 wings. And at the far end, in the lee of the wall, a row of pale straw kept standing like little beehive-shaped churches with their congregations pouring in and out. The noise of it was extraordinary. Not a buzzing, but a deep, steady thrum she felt in her breastbone, and the air was thick and gold and heavy with the smell, and hot and drowsy, and Clara stopped just inside the gate and forgot, for a moment, to be suspicious of anything at all. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, they are magnificent. They are bad-tempered, greedy, and entirely without gratitude," Thorne said. But he had gone still beside her, watching her face instead of the bees, and his voice had lost its careful flatness. "Which is why I like them better than most people. Stand quiet. They read fear off the skin like print. If you are calm, they will walk on you and think you a warm hill. I am never afraid of anything that is only doing its work." Clara took a slow step forward, and another, and a bee lit on the back of her ungloved hand, and sat there, grooming its gold flanks, its small weight a tickle and a warmth, and she held her breath and grinned like a child. "Look, it has decided I am scenery. You have a steady hand." He said it as a plain fact, standing close now, close enough that she could smell the clean of him under the honey, salt and cedar and warm linen, and something in the flat certainty of the words made her look up. He was not watching the bee. Steadier than a governess needs. Steadier than a companion needs, who is paid to lose at cards. His dark eyes moved to the portfolio she had, from long habit, brought out even here, tucked under her arm against the world. "What is it you carry, Miss Linden, that you will not set down even among bees?" And there it was, the first true question anyone on this island had asked her. The first thing anyone had wanted from her, rather than concealed. It undid her more than a week of evasions could have. She should have deflected. Instead, because the sun was hot and the bees were loud and she was, under everything, so very tired of holding the whole of herself close, she sat down on the low sun-warmed brick of the bed's edge and opened the portfolio on her knees and let him see. The drawings breathed out into the light. Sea campion, its petals notched fine as lace. Viper's bugloss in 3 studies, bud to blaze. The ragged blue crowns of sea holly she had never held in her hand, copied out of longing from a bookseller's window. Washes of Prussian blue laid over pen, so fine the lines might have been drawn by an insect's own leg. She did not look at him while he looked. She looked at the bees and waited, with a companion's practiced patience, to be told they were charming, or clever, or a pretty accomplishment for a young woman. He was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had changed altogether. "These are not an accomplishment," he said. "These are work." He crouched, the long muscles of him folding down easily to her level, and he did not touch the pages, she noticed, but held his hands off them the way a man holds his hands off something that is not his. "This one, the holly. You have never seen the living plant." Her head came up. "How could you possibly? Because the bract is wrong." His brown forefinger hovered above the blue crown without landing. "You have made it flat, like a printed pattern. In life it cups, so, to hold the rein to the root. You copied a copy. A good copy. But a copy." He looked up, and they were very close, and his grey eyes had gone dark and alive in a way that made her forget the trapped and lying weak entirely. "I could show you the living plant. It grows on the western cliff, above the old cove. 1/2 mile of very bad walking, and no path to speak of. The corner of his mouth moved. But you are, by your own account, extremely good at waiting, and I did not hear Cliff scrambling anywhere on the list of a companion's arts. Clara laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it, bright and startled, and entirely genuine, and it rang off the warm brick and set a bee wheeling, and she saw the effect of it strike across his face like sun coming through cloud, saw him look, for one unguarded instant, wholly astonished, as though he had forgotten the sound of a woman laughing in his garden, and it had gone into him somewhere old and long shut up. Then he stood, and the courteous wall came down again over his face, and he was Mr. Thorne who kept the place, and she was the companion who had come to the wrong island, and between them the bees roared on, indifferent, in the heavy gold air. "You are not," Clara said carefully, closing the portfolio, "an ordinary keeper of an ordinary place. Mr. Thorne, no." He looked away, out over the sheltering wall to the hard blue line of the sea. "But I keep it very ordinarily, all the same." He rubbed, once, without seeming to know he did it, at the pale band of skin at the base of his third finger. "Come away now. They are getting cross with the sun, and I have things to see to before." He stopped. It was so slight a thing that a less watchful woman would have missed it entirely, a single line going out of him, out of the whole loose, easy set of his shoulders, as though a rope somewhere had come suddenly taut. He was looking past her, past the wall, at the sea, and Clara turned to follow his gaze, and her breath went thin in her chest. There was a sail on the water. It was small yet, and white, and beating steadily in toward the island on the light morning wind, not from the direction of Pentrith, she thought, though she hardly knew the compass of this place, and it was not the grey launch, which stood plainly at its mooring below the harbour steps where Trewin had left it. A second boat. On an island where she had been told, with a housekeeper's grim relish, that there was no getting off but the one, and that the one answered to the master. A second boat, and Thorne's face gone to stone beside her, and the honey-heavy air suddenly not drowsy at all, but taut as a held note. "Who is that?" Clara asked. He did not answer at once. He was watching the sail with an expression she had not yet seen on him, not the courteous blankness, not the buried warmth, but something braced and weary and old, the face of a man watching weather come, that he has no way to turn aside. "That," said Mr. Thorne, "is precisely the misapprehension I have failed to correct." He turned to her, and for the first time since the harbour there was something almost like urgency in the level dark of his eyes. "Miss Linden, I am going to ask you to do something, and I am going to ask it badly, because there is no time to ask it well. When that boat lands, you will hear me called by a name that is not Thorne. You will hear this house called things it is not. I am asking you, for one day, one only, to hear it and hold your questions, and trust that I will answer every last one of them tonight, when the tide has taken her off again. Will you do that?" "Her," Clara repeated. The wind lifted the loose hair at her temple, down the green shoulder of the island, faint and thin across the gorse. A bell had begun to ring. Not the flat custom house notes of Pentrith, but a high bright house bell. A summons, an alarm. "You are asking me to lie for you, Mr. Thorne, to a stranger, in a house I do not understand, about a situation you have taken some pains to keep me inside of, and you have not given me one single reason why I should." "No." He held her eyes. Behind him the skeps thrummed, and the sail grew, white and certain, driving in. "I have not. That is the whole of what I am asking you to trust." A muscle moved in his hard jaw. "Her name is Lady Vane. She was Isolde's sister. She comes 4 times a year to remind me of everything I have failed to be, and she will take one look at you, and your ink-stained hands, and your portfolio, and she will draw a conclusion that can do you a very great deal of harm and me none at all. For I have no name left to lose, Miss Linden, and you have nothing else." The bell rang on. The bees roared. And Clara Linden, curate's daughter, 3 counties, and 1 wrong boat from anyone who loved her, stood in a stranger's honeyed garden and understood that the 7 days of her small confusion had just become something with far sharper edges, that the sail beating in across the flat, bright water carried a beautiful woman, with a conclusion already half drawn, and that the man beside her, whoever he truly was, had just told her the first entirely true thing he had said since the harbor, and it had frightened her far more than any of his lies. The bell did not leave off ringing until the whole house had turned itself inside out to answer it. Clara stood at the edge of the bee garden and watched a transformation she could not have believed the place capable of. Mrs. Pascoe came out onto the terrace, at a pace just short of a run, her keys chiming at last. Calling names Clara had not known belonged to anyone. Alec, Jenna, Pego, and out of the ruined house they came, a boot boy and a pair of maids in aprons, still tied crooked, as though the island had been keeping its servants folded away in drawers against exactly this summons. Sheets were flung from an upper window and hauled in again. Somewhere a chimney that had stood cold was being coaxed to draw. The stopped clock in the hall, Clara would find later, had been wound and set to a lie of an hour, so that it might at least appear to be a house where time was kept. "Go up to your room, Miss Linden." Thorn had not moved, but his voice had. All the warm ease of the garden was gone out of it, planed away to something flat and hard and quick. "Change your gown if you have another. Come down when Mrs. Pascoe fetches you and not before. You have not told me what I am to be." Clara held her ground on the warm brick. The sail was close now, close enough to see a figure standing in the bow, straight as a mast, a green so dark it was nearly black against the flat bright water. "If I am to play a part in your theatre, sir, I should like at the very least to know my lines. Your line is silence." He turned on her, and for one moment the courteous wall was down, and she saw underneath it something she had not expected. Not anger, but a kind of grief worn so long it had gone to bone. "I am sorry. I have no right to ask it, and no time to earn it. Be Miss Linden. Be a curate's daughter with a portfolio who came on the wrong boat. Every word of that is true, and the truth will carry you further with that woman than any lie I could dress you in. Only, do not tell her what I am, because you do not yet know, and a thing you do not know cannot be got out of you." The bee hum roared behind her. Down at the harbor the second boat rounded the black tooth of rock, and Truan's grey launch swung on its mooring as the swell came in ahead of the stranger. "And what are you?" Clara asked. But he was already gone from her, striding down the terrace path with his coat pulled straight and his shoulders squared into a shape she had not seen him wear, the shape of a man walking to meet a creditor whose account he can never clear. She did as she was told. She had, after all, a lifetime's training in doing as she was told and thinking her own thoughts in the doing of it. She changed her dusty traveling gown for the one other she owned, a plain sprigged muslin gone soft with washing, and she pinned her hair, and she stood at the blue room's window and watched the beautiful woman come up through the ruined garden on Thorn's arm. And she catalogued. Lady Vane was fair, as Isolde in the portrait had been fair, but where the painted sister laughed this one did not. She moved up the broken terraces in her dark green travelling habit, as though the wilderness were a personal affront the master of the place had arranged expressly to wound her. She was perhaps 35 and lovely, in the cold exact way of a frost flower on glass, and she carried a furled green parasol she did not open, using it instead to point, once, at the blind silver ruin of the glasshouse, and say something Clara could not hear, and watch Thorn receive it without a word. Mrs. Pascoe came for her within the half hour. "You're to come down." The housekeeper's face had shut like a fist. "Say little. Eat less. And whatever her ladyship asks you, miss, answer it plain and short and true, and let the master do the rest." "His what? Mrs. Pascoe?" But the housekeeper only pressed her lips white and led her down the stair. The drawing-room had been resurrected around its visitor. Holland covers were gone from 2 chairs and a settee. A fire no one needed burned small and apologetic in a grate scrubbed for the occasion, and the long windows stood open to the summer, so that the whole hot green breath of the island came in and stirred the dust that 3 years had laid over everything. Lady Vane sat in the best of the chairs with her back to the light, which put her face in shadow and every other face in the room at her mercy. She did not rise. She turned her head as Clara entered, and her eyes, pale grey, cool as the sea in the shadow of the cliff, went over the sprigged muslin and the pinned hair and the ink that would not leave the fingernails, and Clara felt herself weighed and priced and shelved in the space of a breath. "So it is true," Lady Vane said. Her voice was low and beautifully made, each word set down like a stitch. "Pascoe would have it there was a young person come off the Tuesday boat. I confess I did not believe her. It has been so very long since anything came to this island but flour and regret." She let the parasol tip against her knee. "Come here, child, into the light where I can see you. My brother-in-law has always kept his acquisitions in shadow. It is one of his economies." Clara crossed the room. She did not hurry, and she did not creep, and she came to a stop at exactly the distance a curate's daughter keeps from a great lady, and she made her curtsy, neither too deep nor too shallow, and she said, "Miss Linden, my lady, I fear I am the regret. The flower, I am told, is expected Tuesday next." Somewhere behind her, near the window, she heard Thorn go very still. Lady Vane's fair brows lifted a fraction. "It has a tongue, it has a father in orders and no fortune, which comes to much the same thing," Clara said. "I was engaged as companion to a Lady Fenwick, of St. Aubrey's. I have discovered, since landing, that I am neither at St. Aubrey's nor in Lady Fenwick's employ, and that the boat which brought me answers to a master who has not yet found the leisure to explain to me whose house I am standing in. I should be very glad, my lady, if you could tell me." No one else appears willing. The room held its breath. The fire ticked. Far off through the open window the bees droned on in their walled square, indifferent to the whole affair of human beings, and Clara kept her eyes on the beautiful cold face in the chair, and did not once look toward the window where Thorn stood, though she felt the weight of his warning across the room, like a hand on the back of her neck. Lady Vane began, softly, to laugh. "Oh, this is rich," she said. "This is very rich, indeed. He has not told you." She turned her head toward the window, and her smile widened, and it did not touch her eyes any more than Thorn's ever did, but where his warmth hid behind the coldness. In her there was only more cold, all the way down. "Khan, she does not know. You let a friendless girl off your boat and onto your island, and you have kept her here 3 days without so much as telling her your name." "2 days, Thorn said. The flatness of his voice was terrible. "And I would have told her tonight. Tonight, Lady Vane savoured it. After I had gone. Of course." She rose now, at last, unfolding from the chair with the unhurried grace of a woman who has never once in her life had to move before she chose to, and she came across the room to Clara and took her chin in 2 cool gloved fingers and turned her face to the light as though examining a horse. "Look at you. Ink to the knuckle and terror behind the eyes, and a jaw that will not drop however hard I lean on it. He always did like them with spine. My sister had spine. It did her a great deal of good in the end." "Vane, 1 word," from the window. "A warning. Let me tell you where you are standing, Miss Linden, since the master of it will not." Lady Vane released Clara's chin, but held her eyes, and the pale grey of them was pitiless and almost kind, the way a surgeon is almost kind. "You are standing in the great hall of the Duke of Khan. This whole green rock in the sea is his, and the boats upon it, and the bees, and the house, and every soul who serves in it, and 3 years ago it held a duchess. My sister Isolde, the loveliest creature that ever wasted herself on a silent man, and now it holds no one at all but him, and his servants, and his skeps, and his ruin. And you," she smiled. "And now, you." The name went through Clara like cold water down the spine. Duke. Duke of Khan. She heard, distantly, the whole architecture of 2 days rebuild itself in an instant around that single word. The scraped crest on the boat. The velvet cushion. The sir from a boatman to a man in his shirt sleeves. The pale band on the finger that had worn a ring a long time. The flagless staff. The upper servant taking orders without a blink. The owner, Mrs. Pascoe had said it, and said it. The owner, the master, and Clara, who prided herself on being the most observant person in any room, had sat inside the answer for 2 whole days and called it Mr. Thorne because a man in a garden had let her. She turned, then, and looked at him. He met her eyes across the resurrected room. He did not flinch, and he did not soften. He only looked back at her with that braced and weary stillness, and she saw in his face that every word the woman had spoken was true, and that he had known Clara would learn it exactly like this, in the cruelest possible mouth, and had chosen the risk of it over the risk of telling her himself. The betrayal of it was not large. That was what undid her. It was small, and quiet, and complete. The betrayal of a man who had made her laugh among his bees, and shown her that the sea holly cupped to hold the rain, and had let her go on calling him a keeper, because it suited some purpose of his own that she could not see, and had not been trusted to know. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. She dropped him a curtsy, the deep one, the one she had withheld from the lady, the one that servants give and that put the whole of the last 2 days between them like a drawn sword. "Forgive me. I have been calling you very much the wrong thing." Something crossed his face that was worse than anger. "Miss Linden, no." She straightened. "You said my line was silence, sir, and I kept it, and I have just heard where that silence was leading me. I find I prefer my own lines after all." She turned back to Lady Vane, and lifted her chin, and gave the lady the smile a curate's daughter keeps for the moment she decides she has nothing further to lose. "I am obliged to you, my lady. You have told me in 5 minutes what this house would not tell me in 2 days. It is a debt. I do not care to be in anyone's debt, so I will discharge it at once by being wholly honest with you, which I perceive is a currency in short supply on this island. I am nobody. I came on the wrong boat. I have not the smallest designs on his grace, his island, his bees, or his ruin, and the instant a boat can be got to take me back to Pentrith I shall be on it, and you may all resume falling gracefully to pieces without an audience." For a moment, Lady Vane simply looked at her. Then she laughed again, a different laugh, lower, almost appreciative. "No," she said. "No. I don't think you shall. I beg your pardon?" "I said I don't think you shall be on any boat." Lady Vane drifted back toward her chair, trailing the furled parasol, entirely at her ease. "You see, Miss Linden, I have come at an inconvenient time, as I always do. That is rather the point of me. But I have come for a reason, and the reason will not let you go so easily as all that." She sank into the chair and arranged her dark green skirts and looked up at the Duke with an expression of the purest, sweetest malice. "Shall I tell her why I have come, Khan? Or will you spare yourself that much and tell her yourself?" The Duke of Khan said nothing. His hand had gone, Clara saw, to the base of his 3rd finger, and closed there, over the pale band, as though to hide it. "He will not." Lady Vane sighed, a small satisfied sound. "He never will." "Very well. I have come, Miss Linden, because in 1 month's time it will be 3 years to the day since my sister was taken by the sea off the western cliff of this island, the cliff His Grace was no doubt about to walk you out to show you the pretty flowers. And on that day, by the terms of the settlement my father was fool enough to sign, the wardship of my sister's daughter becomes his beyond any challenging of mine, unless before that day I can show cause. And I mean to show cause. I mean to show that this island is no fit place for a child of 6, and that the man who keeps it is no fit guardian, Being a recluse who lets a duchess's house fall into the sea and lets strange young women off his boats and keeps them in his blue room without a chaperone in the house, but a housekeeper who would swear the moon was cheese if he asked it of her. She smiled at Clara. You have been on this island 2 days, unmarried, unaccompanied, in a gentleman's sole establishment. You are, Miss Linden, whether you have designs on him or no, the best cause I have been handed in 3 years. I could not have arranged you better if I had ordered you from a shop. The fire ticked. The bees droned. And Clara stood in the middle of the beautiful ruined room and felt the trap close its second, sharper jaw. The first had been the wrong boat, and this was the wrong reputation, and she saw with her cold late clarity that the two of them together made a thing she might not walk out of whole. There is a child, she said slowly, on this island. There is a little girl. There is. It was the Duke who answered, at last, and his voice had changed again, gone low and rough, and entirely stripped of its careful flatness, and he was looking at Clara now, and not at Lady Vane at all. There is a little girl. Her name is Perpetua, and she is 6 years old, and she is asleep at this hour in the west wing with her nurse, and she is the reason for every locked door, and every turned picture, and every lie I have let you believe. She does not come down when the boat with the green sail comes in. She has learned that much. She is well, Miss Linden. She is well, and she is happy, and she is fed, and she is loved, and she is the one thing on this rock I have not let go to ruin, and I will do anything, to keep from losing the keeping of her. His eyes held Clara's. That is what I could not tell you until you knew it could not be got out of you. Now it is out. Now you know the whole of it, and now, God forgive me, you are inside it as deep as I am. Clara's heart had begun to beat very hard. A child. A little girl called Perpetua, 6 years old, asleep and safe in a wing she had been kept from. The locked doors, the turned faces, the work-basket with its one grey unfinished rose. Not a mausoleum after all, she thought. A fortress. He has not been shutting the house up around his grief. He has been shutting it up around her. Isolde was her mother, Clara said. And you are. I am nothing to her by blood. The words came out of him hard and precise, each one costing something. She is my ward. My brother's child. My brother and Isolde. He stopped, and his jaw worked, and he chose the next words with visible care. My brother is many years gone from England, and unfit besides, and Isolde was lost to the sea 3 summers ago, and there was no one else who would have the child but this lady here, who wants her only as a rod to break me with, and a settlement that gave her to me. I have kept her. I have kept her here, out of the world, where no one could take her, and I have let this house fall down around us both, rather than fill it with servants who would carry tales to the mainland. And now you have come off the wrong boat into the middle of it, and this lady means to make you the proof that I am unfit. He turned to Lady Vane, and his voice went to iron. You will not use her. She is nothing to do with this. I will put her on the launch to Pentrith within the hour, and she will be gone before your green sail is out of the harbour, and there is your proof gone with her. Oh, Carne. Lady Vane shook her fair head slowly, and her smile was terrible in its patience. You cannot put her on any boat now, and you know it. If she goes today, a young woman fled off your island the very hour I arrived. What shall I make of that, do you suppose, before the magistrate? A guilty flight, a thing hushed up. No, she rose, gathering her parasol. She stays until I go, Miss Linden and I, cheek by cheek, so that I may study her at my leisure and decide precisely how much use she is to me. I shall stay the week. The tides, as your housekeeper is so fond of observing, being what they are. She paused at the door. You have a very great deal to think about, all of you. I find I am fatigued from my crossing. Pasco shall show me to my room. The yellow room, Pasco. My sister's room. I always take my sister's room. And you may all spend the afternoon deciding what story you will tell me. and I shall spend it deciding whether to believe a word of it. Good day. She went out. Her step was light and unhurried on the stone, and it faded up the stair, and the drawing-room was left with the small apologetic fire and the open windows, and the three of them, the Duke, the housekeeper white-faced by the door, and Clara Linden, standing in the middle of a stranger's grief, with her plain muslin, and her ink-stained hands, and the whole shape of her small confusion turned, in the space of an hour, into something with teeth. Mrs. Pascoe went after the lady, because she had been bidden, and because there was nothing else to be done, and the door closed, and Clara and the Duke of Caen were alone. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The bees came in at the window. The sea washed the rock below. "You could have sent me back," Clara said at last, quietly. It was not the largest of the things in her chest, but it was the one with the sharpest edge, and it came out first. That first evening. When I stood at the window and asked Mrs. Pascoe when the boat went back, and she gave me that grim little speech about the one boat that answers to the master. The master could have answered it. You could have told Trewin to take me across on the morning tide, and I would have been at St. Aubrey's by noon, and none of this would have touched me. You kept me. Her voice did not shake, and she was fiercely glad of it. You let me sit in your blue room and eat your stale bread and freed the bee off your window, and looked at my drawings and told me the holly cupped to hold the rain, and the whole while you knew you could have set me free of it with one word to your boatman, and you did not say the word. He did not deny it. That was the worst of him, and, she would think later, the best. He stood by the cold window with the light behind him, and he let her lay it all out, and he did not once reach for the shelter of a lie. "No," he said. "I did not say it." "Why?" "Because Trewin came to me that first evening and asked did he row you across in the morning." The Duke's voice was very low. "And I stood in this room, and I looked up at your lit window. You were at it. I saw you. You had your portfolio open on the sill, and you were looking down at the garden. And I found I did not want to say yes. That is the whole of the truth, Miss Linden, and it does me no credit, and I have no better answer to give you." I told him the crossing could wait a day. And then a day was two. And then the green sail came. He looked down at his hand, at the pale band. "I have kept this island shut for 3 years. I have not wanted a single thing that came to it. Not the flower, nor the visitors, nor the letters from my man of business begging me to come to town and be a duke. And then a curate's daughter came off the wrong boat with terror behind her eyes, and a jaw that would not drop, and asked me who I was, and I found I did not want her to go before I had learned the answer to a question or two of my own. It was selfish. It has put you in the path of that woman. I am more sorry than I can tell you." He raised his eyes. "But I will not pretend it was an accident, because you would know the lie, and I find I have run clean out of lies I am willing to tell you." The honesty of it was worse than any evasion could have been, because it left her nowhere to stand. She had come 3 counties and 1 wrong boat prepared to be lied to, and instead this silent man had just handed her the whole ugly truth of why she was trapped, and the trap was that he had liked the look of her at a lit window, and there was no clean cold fury to be had against a thing like that, only a confusion that ran all the way down. "You have made me a weapon," Clara said, "against yourself. Against a little girl I have never seen. That woman will stand in front of a magistrate in 1 month and say my name and ruin me to get at you, and the child Perpetua, she will use a 6-year-old as a rod to break you. You said so yourself, and I am to be the flint she strikes the spark on." She pressed the heel of her hand to her breastbone, where the honey-thick air seemed suddenly too thick to breathe. "I came here to earn £30 a year and fill the margins of my evenings with flowers. I did not come to hold a child's whole life in my 2 ink-stained hands. I did not agree to it." "No one asked me." "No one asked you," he agreed. "No one asked you to the island at all. The sea and a lying boatman and my own silence brought you, and I will not add my asking to the list of things done to you without your leave." He came a step nearer, and stopped, keeping the careful distance she had drawn between them with her deep servant's curtsy. "So I will ask you nothing, Miss Linden. I will only tell you this, and then you may do as you see fit, and I will abide it. That woman means to take Perpetua off this rock and into a house where she is a grievance and a rod and never once a child. I have 3 years watching to know it for the truth. If you go to the magistrate with her, if you tell them what she wishes told, that I am a recluse who keeps strange women in his house, you will save yourself, and it will cost you nothing, and it will cost that little girl every safe thing she has. And if you stand with me, if you let me find a way to make you respectable in that woman's teeth, a governess honestly engaged, a companion to the child, a thing the world can look at without a smirk, then you will have chained yourself to my ruin, and to hers, and to a fight in a courtroom a month from now that we may very well lose." He spread his hard hands, palms up, empty. That is the whole of the choice. And it is a monstrous one to lay before a woman who wanted only £30 and some flowers, and I lay it before you, because you have earned the truth of it, and because there is no one else. I cannot make you choose. I would not if I could. Clara looked at him a long moment. Then she crossed to the window, past him, and stood where she had stood that first evening, and looked down the ruined terraces to the walled square of the bee garden, where 10,000 small lives roared on about their honest business, and beyond it to the hard blue line of the sea that had brought her, and would not, now, easily take her back. Behind her she heard him waiting. She was learning the particular quiet of him, and she understood that whatever she said in the next breath she could not unsay, that this was the door swinging shut behind the wrong boat, and the wrong reputation, and the whole wrong shape her life had folded itself into on the warmest morning of the year, and that on the far side of it there was no version of Clara Linden who got safely back to Pentreath with her folio and her £30 and her small, unbroken future intact. "I should like," she said, without turning round, and her voice was very steady and very quiet, "to meet the child before I decide anything at all. I will not be made a weapon for either side of this, my lady's or yours. Over the head of a little girl I have never so much as laid eyes on." She turned, then, and looked at the Duke of Karn across the room where his Duchess's picture had once hung, and where now there was only a paler square on the faded rose of the wall. "Take me to Perpetua, your grace. And after that we shall see what I am willing to be chained to." For a moment he did not move. Then something eased in his shoulders, some rope gone slack at last, and he inclined his dark head, and it was very nearly a bow. "Come then," he said. "She will be waking from her rest. And she does not care in the least who anyone is, duke or keeper or curate's daughter, which you will find, Miss Linden, the most restful thing about her." The corner of his mouth moved, that ghost of warmth surfacing even here, even now, at the edge of the abyss. "Only mind, she will want to show you the bees. She thinks they are hers. I have never had the heart to tell her otherwise." He crossed to a door Clara had not been through, in the shut west wing where the pictures faced the wall, and set his broad brown hand to the latch, and above them both, faint through the old stone, came the sound of a child's light, quick feet crossing a floor, and a small voice calling out for someone by a name, and Clara Linden. 3 counties in 2 days, and one closing door from the woman she had been, gathered her portfolio against her chest with both arms, the way a woman holds the only thing she cannot afford to drop, and followed the Duke of Karn toward the one room in his ruined house he had kept from falling. The room beyond the latch was the brightest in the house, and the only one where nothing faced the wall. Sun poured through 3 tall windows onto a scrubbed floor strewn with the wreckage of a happy morning, a wooden horse tipped on its side, a fleet of paper boats run aground on a rag rug, a slate chalked over with lopsided bees. A stout woman in a clean apron rose from her chair by the cold grate, and a child looked up from the hearth, and the child's whole face opened like a casement thrown wide to the sea. Uncle Karn. She was across the floor before the nurse could draw breath, fair hair flying loose of its ribbon, and she wrapped both arms about the Duke's leg and tipped her head back the whole tall length of him. "Nurse said you were with the cross lady. Is she gone?" "I made you a boat. It has a real sail, out of Nurse's cap, only don't tell her," and it sank. "She is not gone, and I am very sorry to hear about my boat." He set his broad brown hand on her head, and Clara watched the braced weariness go out of him at the touch, smoothed away as the tide smooths sand. "Perpetua, I have brought you someone. This is Miss Linden. She came off the wrong boat, which is a thing that can happen to anyone, and she draws flowers better than anyone in England." The child turned her clear grey eyes, his colouring somewhere in them, Clara thought, though the fairness was all the painted sisters, up at the stranger, and considered her without the smallest fear. "Do you draw bees?" "I never have," Clara admitted, crouching down to the small solemn face, "but I should like to learn. I am told they belong to you." "They do." Perpetua said it with the flat certainty of undisputed fact. "All of them. Uncle Carney minds them for me until I am tall enough. I am nearly tall enough. Will you draw me one holding a flower? Nurse can only draw one bit at a time, and it comes out a beetle." "A grave slander," said the nurse comfortably, gathering up the fallen fleet. "I will draw you a whole hive," Clara said, "if you will show me which one is the crossest." "There is always a crossest." The child seized her ink-stained hand in both of her warm ones, entirely satisfied, and towed her to the slate, and began at once and without pause to explain the private histories of 11 bees, each of whom had a name and a grievance, and Clara knelt on the hard floor in her washed muslin, with the summer pouring gold across the boards, and let herself be governed, and did not once think of magistrates. Above the child's bent head she felt the Duke watching, and she looked up, and found in his dark grey eyes a thing that had nothing of the keeper in it, and nothing of the Duke, only a man looking at the two of them together on his nursery floor, as though the sight were a door he had thought bricked up for good. "She likes you," he said quietly. "She does not like most people. She is an excellent judge, and a very poor courtier, which will ruin her in society, and has entirely charmed me for 6 years." "Uncle Carney," said Perpetua. "Without looking round, you are talking over my head." "You always talk over my head." "Miss Linden, does the crossest bee want to be drawn frightening, or only a little frightening?" Clara laughed, the bright startled laugh that had undone him in the garden, and the child laughed because she had, and the nurse smiled into the paper boats, and for the space of that sunlit hour the shut wing of a falling house held nothing at all but the ordinary noise of the living. They kept the shape of that hour for 2 days, because Lady Vane, having laid her trap, seemed content to sit beside it and watch it work. She took her sister's yellow room, and her sister's chair at dinner, and her sister's tone with the servants, and she watched. She watched Clara pass in the corridor with the child's hand in hers. She watched the Duke shorten his stride on the terrace to Clara's, and free a bramble from her skirt with 2 fingers before she felt the snag, and she filed each small thing away behind her cool grey eyes with a bookkeeper's patience. And on the second evening, when the low sun lay long and amber across the ruined terraces, and the honey smell rose thick as syrup off the walled garden, the 4 of them were on the south lawn among the bee-skeps, and it was, for one whole golden turn of the glass, everything the house had refused to be. Perpetua sat cross-legged on a fallen coping stone, a bee walking the back of her steady hand, narrating. The Duke had rolled his shirt to the elbow again, and was cutting back a rose that had gone to wilderness, and the low thrum of 10,000 wings filled the warm air, and Clara sat on the sun, baked brick, with her portfolio open, and drew the whole of it. The child, the skeps, the tall, unhurried man among the ruined beds. "You have made me too broad in the shoulder," the Duke said, leaning to look, smelling of cut green and warm linen and salt. "No man is that broad. You are exactly that broad. It is one of your least ambiguous qualities." She washed a line of Prussian blue into the shadow of the wall. Hold still. You keep moving into a more flattering light. I am incapable of an unflattering light, he said gravely. It is the last of my estates that has not fallen into the sea. And Perpetua, without looking up from her bee, said, Uncle Khan, that was a joke. You were supposed to wait for people to laugh, and Clara did laugh, and the corner of his hard mouth moved, and something passed between the two adults over the child's fair head that was warm and wordless and terribly like a future. When the glass house is glazed again, Clara heard herself say, and stopped, the brush lifting off the page, because she had spoken of a wen, and a wen on this island belonged to no one who meant to leave it. When the glass house is glazed again, the Duke finished for her, low, not looking away from the rose. You will want the south wall for the tender things. It holds the heat past dark. I have been telling the owner so for years. He looked up then, and held her eyes across the golden air, and neither of them smiled, and the bees roared on between them, and it was the most that either had yet dared to say. It was that same night that Clara saw the other thing, the thing Lady Vane kept behind the cold. She had gone up late, past the yellow room, and the door stood a hand's width ajar, and a single candle burned within, and Clara, who could not leave a thing half shown any more than she could leave a picture turned to the wall, paused in the dark passage and looked. Lady Vane sat at the dressing table in her wrapper, her fair hair down and softer for it, and she held in both hands a small thing that caught the candle, a child's coral teething ring, worn smooth, the sort a mother keeps. Her thumb moved across it, and moved, and moved, as though she had forgotten she was doing it. Her cold, lovely face in the glass had come undone. There were no tears on it. It was worse than tears. It was the bare, private face of a woman holding the one thing left of someone she had loved before, that someone was ever anyone's grievance, or anyone's rod. Clara stood very still in the dark. Then she stepped back from the threshold, and drew the door soundlessly to its former gap, and carried the sight of it away up the cold stair to keep. The blow came at dawn, and it came, as she should have known it would, from the man himself. She woke to a knock, and Mrs. Pascoe's shuttered face, and the news that His Grace wished to see her in the library before the house stirred. He was standing at the tall window when she came, dressed for travel weather in a dark coat, his back to her, and the grey sea behind the glass, and he did not turn. Trewin has the launch ready, the Duke said. The tide serves at 7. He will take you across to St. Aubrey's, to Lady Fenwick, who has been written to, and who will have you gladly. You will be a companion on a snug grey island, as you set out to be, and none of this will ever have touched your name. His voice was flat, plained of everything. You should go up and pack. There is not much time. Clara stood in the middle of the cold room. And Perpetua. Perpetua is not your affair. Now he turned, and his face was the shut, courteous wall she had first met at the harbour, and it was worse than any anger because she had learned what lay behind it, and he was denying her the whole of it. I have thought on this through the night. If you are on that woman's island tomorrow, she names you before the magistrate, and you are finished. A curate's daughter, with no fortune and no name to shield her, unmarried in a widower's house. I will not spend you. There is nothing you can do here but be spent. So you will go, and Vane will have no witness worth the calling, and I will meet her in a month with what I have, which is little, and God will do as he sees fit. You are sending me away to save me. I am sending you away because I have no further use to make of you, he said, and because keeping you would be one more thing this house has taken that it had no right to. Go and pack, Miss Linden. Do not make it hard. She stood a long moment and let the cold of it go all the way down. He had wanted the look of her at a lit window. He had said so himself, said it was selfish, said it did him no credit, and now the window had served its purpose and grown inconvenient, and he was drawing the curtain. He had never truly seen her at all, only a use, only a warm hill for his loneliness to walk upon, and the use was spent, and so was she. He would keep his child and his ruin and his bees, and she would be a line struck from the ledger, a passenger the house had fetched by mistake and put back. He had made her laugh among his bees, so that it should cost her more to be sent off with the flower. "Very well, Your Grace," she said, and her voice did not break, and she was savagely glad of it. She curtsied, the deep one, the servant's one, the drawn sword, and left him at his window with his grey sea, and went up to pack her portfolio and her £30 of ruined future, and did not once look back to see whether the wall had come down off his face when she could no longer see it. She could not sleep the little that was left of the night, and so, an hour before the tide, she went down, not to the harbour, but to the little east parlour, to say goodbye to the one room in the house that had ever felt like a woman's, and to leave, on some impulse she could not name, a single drawing of the bees for the child who thought they were hers. The work-basket sat where it had sat, by the window, with the embroidery hoop and its one grey unfinished rose furred over with 3 years of dust. Clara lifted the hoop to lay her drawing beneath it, the way one leaves a flower, and her fingers found, folded flat under the tangle of faded silks, where a working woman hides the thing she means to come back to, a letter. The paper was soft with age and never sent. Clara carried it to the grey window light and unfolded it, and the hand was a woman's, fair and quick, and blotted here and there, as though written against time, and it began, "Augusta, if you are reading this, it is because the sea has had its way with me at last, as I always told Khan it would, and you are standing in my house, making that face." Clara's breath stopped in her chest. "Do not," the letter ran on, "do not take her off this rock. I know you, my dear. I know you will come with the law folded in your reticule, and grief sharpened to a point, and you will call this a bad place, and Kane a bad man. And you will be wrong on both counts, and right that it will wound him, which is the whole of what you will be after. Listen to me. Perpetua belongs here. She belongs to the bees she thinks are hers, and to the man who has never once in her hearing raised his voice, and to this ruin that he lets fall, rather than fill with strangers who would frighten her. Kane did not fail me. I went out on the water against his asking, as I have gone against every asking since we were girls, and the fault was mine, and the sea's, and none of his. And if he is telling himself otherwise, and he will be, he is exactly that sort of fool, then you are to tell him from me that I forbid it. Let him keep her. Let him keep the island. And Augusta, let him, one day, keep someone who makes him laugh. For he will not do it for himself, and you and I both know the silence of that man could swallow a life. There was a name at the bottom, and a date 3 years gone, and under it, in the same hand but fainter, as though added another day, come back for the child yourself, sister, and be her aunt and not her jailer. There is room in a life for both. There was always room. Aye. Clara sat down slowly on the dusty little chair, with the letter in her 2 hands, and outside the window the first light came grey, and then gold over the terraces, and somewhere below a boat's tackle knocked against a mast on the turning tide. She had a weapon now. But it was not a weapon for her. It would not unname her, would not carry her whole back to Pentreath. It was a weapon for a 6-year-old who thought she owned the bees, and for a silent man carrying 3 years of a blame that was never his to carry, and it had been lying under a grey rose all this, while waiting for someone who could not leave a hidden thing hidden. She did not go to the harbour. She folded the letter, and put it inside her portfolio against her drawings where her whole fortune lay, and went instead to find the yellow room. Lady Vane was dressed, and at the glass, pinning her fair hair for her own departure, when Clara came in without knocking and shut the door behind her. "You are meant to be on my boat, not I on yours," Lady Vane observed to the mirror. "Khan told me at first light he had packed you off. I confess I was disappointed. I had grown almost fond of studying you." She set a pin. "Have you come to beg? It will not answer. Begging never does. I have come to read you something." Clara crossed the room and stood where the light fell on her, unfolding the soft old paper. It was under your sister's embroidery. She never sent it. I think she meant to finish the rose first and never had the time. She watched the cool grey eyes flick to the paper and go still. It begins, Augusta. If you are reading this, it is because the sea has had its way with me at last, and you are standing in my house making that face. The pin dropped from Lady Vane's fingers onto the table with a small, clear sound. Clara read it all. She read it steadily, in the plain, soothing voice she used for the sermons she despised, and she did not spare a word, not the forbidding. Not the carnet did not fail me. Not the let him keep someone who makes him laugh. Not the last faint line about room in a life for both. And when she had finished, she folded the letter and held it, and the beautiful cold woman at the glass had not moved at all. Her hand arrested at her hair, her face in the mirror, doing the thing Clara had seen it do by candlelight over a child's worn coral ring. That is not her hand, Lady Vane said. It came out without any of its lovely architecture. You wrote it. You are cleverer than I. You know it is her hand. Clara laid the letter open on the dressing table, in the lady's reach, beside the fallen pin. You have had 30 years of her letters. Read it yourself. She made her own S's like little sails, you know she did. I could no more forge that than I could forge the sea. She stepped back. I am nobody, my lady. I have no fortune, and no name, and every reason to be on that boat this minute, saving what little of myself there is to save. I gain nothing by this. I stand to lose the whole of the small future I own. But I will not let you take a happy child off this rock as a rod to break a good man, when the child's own mother lay under a grey rose for 3 years forbidding it. That is all. You may make of me what you like before the magistrate. I would rather be ruined telling the truth than saved keeping quiet. I find it is a family failing. I take it from my father. Lady Vane picked up the letter. She read it. Clara saw her eyes go along the lines, saw the exact place where they stopped, and stopped again. And when she set it down, her lovely face had come the whole way undone at last, and it was not a surgeon's face any longer, nor a bookkeeper's, only a sister's. She always did go out against his asking, she said, very low, to no one, since we were girls. I told them both it would be the water in the end. Her hand pressed flat to the paper as though to feel the warmth long gone out of it. I did not come for the child, Miss Linden. Not truly. I came because she is here, and I am not, because this house has her mother in every turned picture, and I could not bear that he had the keeping of it, and I had a coral ring in a reticule. I made grief into a suit at law, because a suit at law was a thing I knew how to hold. She looked up. That is not a reason. I know it is not a reason. She has told me so, 3 years too late, in her own hand, with the sails on her S's. Then put it down, Clara said gently. She left you room to be the aunt and not the jailer. She said there was always room. For a long moment the only sound was the sea and the far indifferent roar of the bees through the open window. Then Lady Vane rose, and went to the small writing desk in the corner, and drew a sheet toward her, and dipped the pen, and wrote, steadily, several lines. Her fair head bent, and blotted it, and folded it, and came and put it into Clara's hand, closing the ink-stained fingers over it herself. Take it to him. I cannot watch his face when he reads it. I have watched enough of his faces to last me. Her voice had found a little of its old edge, but the edge had nothing behind it now but tiredness. It withdraws my cause. All of it. It says, read it, it says, I renounce every claim upon the wardship of Perpetua, and upon the conduct of the Duke of Khan, and I ask my niece's pardon, and my sister's. There. It is signed, and it is dated, and it is witnessed by no one. But he will not need a witness. He will know my hand as I knew hers. She turned back to the glass, and picked up her fallen pin, and her hands were not quite steady. I will take the launch at the next tide, and trouble this house no more than 4 times a year, and those times I will come as an aunt. Go to him, Miss Linden. And when you have given him the paper, do the other thing my sister asked. He will not do it for himself. Clara found him where she had left him, at the library window with the grey sea gone blue and bright behind the glass, and he turned at the sound of the door with a face braced for the news that she had gone. "You are still here," he said. "I am still here." She crossed the room and laid Lady Vane's folded paper on the table between them, and did not explain it, only watched him take it up and break the fold and read. She saw the line his shoulders held come slack, saw the paper tremble the smallest degree in his broad, steady hand, saw him read it twice, and a third time, the way a man reads a thing he cannot make himself believe. "She has withdrawn," he said. "She has withdrawn." He looked up, and his dark grey eyes were bright and stunned and wholly unguarded. "How, Miss Linden? What did you—" Your Isolde left a letter. Clara took the soft old sheet from her portfolio and put it too into his hands, gently, the way one hands over something that is not one's own, under her embroidery. 3 years, waiting, she wrote it to her sister, but there is a thing in it for you, and I will not let you read past it and pretend you did not, so I will say it aloud. She wrote, "Khan did not fail me. I went out against his asking, and the fault was mine, and the sea's, and none of his. She forbids you the blame, Your Grace." In her own hand. She says you are exactly the sort of fool to be carrying it, and that she forbids it. He read the letter. She watched 3 years go across his face, the shut wing, the turned pictures, the pale band where the ring had been. The whole architecture of a grief he had built himself into like a man walling up his own door, and she watched it, slowly, come down. When he had finished, he stood a long time with his head bowed over the paper, and his throat worked, and the light off the sea moved on the wall, and Clara waited, because she had learned the particular quiet of him, and knew this one needed no filling. "I put the ring off the night she was lost," he said at last, roughly, without looking up. "My father's signet. The Duke's ring. I told myself a man who could not keep his own brother's wife off the water had no business wearing the thing that said he could be trusted with an island and the souls on it. I have kept the place as a penance, and shut the child up in it as a hoarding, as though if I let no one in, nothing more could be taken out." He raised his eyes. "And then the sea sent me a woman off the wrong boat who would not stop asking me who I was, and I found I wanted, for the first time in 3 years, to be someone worth the answer. You sent me away this morning," Clara said. "You told me you had no further use to make of me." I lied. He said it simply, the way he had told the truth about the bees. "I have run out of lies I am willing to tell you, and that one was the last of them, and I could not even make it hold a single tide. I sent you to save you. I would send you again if I thought it would save you, and I would hate every stroke of the oar." He came round the table, and this time he did not keep the careful distance. He came and stood close, and lifted his hand, and touched, barely, the loose chestnut hair at her temple, where the pins had lost the argument again. "I have loved you since you told the harbour you had the look of a curate's daughter, only poorer, and made a walnut-faced old man laugh, who has not laughed in my hearing in 20 years. I have no right to say it. I am a ruin and a recluse, and I come with a child and an island and a sister-in-law 4 times a year. But you asked me who I was, Miss Linden, and here is the whole of the answer at last. I am a man who loves you, and who would very much like to glaze the glasshouse, and give the south wall to your tender things, and keep someone at last who makes him laugh, for I am told, on the best authority, that my silence could swallow a life, and I find I no longer wish to test it." Clara's eyes stung, and she let them, for once, and did not blink it away. "I will not be a device," she said. "Not a governess got up to fool a magistrate, not a companion made respectable in anyone's teeth. If you marry me, it is because you want the woman with ink under her nails who draws bees, and for no other reason under heaven, and I will hold you to it every day of your life." "For no other reason under heaven," he agreed, and the corner of his hard mouth moved, and then the whole grave face gave way to the thing that made him a decade younger, and considerably more dangerous. though I reserve the right to also want the drawings. The holly especially. You will have to see the living plant now, you understand. 1/2 mile of very bad walking. I did warn you." She laughed, and he drew her in. And there in the library, where his Duchess's portrait had once hung, and where the wall now showed only a paler square waiting to be filled with something new, the Duke of Khan kissed the curate's daughter, who had come off the wrong boat. Once, gently, with 3 years of silence breaking behind it like a spring tide over a seawall. And outside the open window the bees roared on, gold and indifferent and entirely satisfied, about their honest business in the summer air. The glass house was glazed by the following June, every silver blind pane made new, and it threw back the low evening sun in one long sheet of honest fire down the length of a garden that no longer knew itself. Clara walked the western cliff path on the warmest evening of that first married summer, with her hand tucked into her husband's arm, and Perpetua ran ahead of them through the bolted flower with a jar for beetles, fair hair flying, entirely tall enough now, she had decided, to own the bees outright. The gorse was hot and yellow, the sea flat and green as bottle glass far below, and the whole island breathed out that dark, sweet river of honey Clara had first smelled from a stranger's boat a year gone, and would smell now. She knew, every summer of her life. "There," said the Duke, and stopped, and pointed with the hand that wore his father's signet again. He had put it back on the morning of the wedding, without a word, and she had seen Mrs. Pascoe turn quickly to the window and stay there some while. The living plant. As promised. "And you will observe the bract." Clara knelt in the short cliff turf and looked, and there it was, the sea holly she had copied from a bookseller's window over a fortnight of Saturdays, and never once held, the ragged blue crowns, and each one cupped, exactly as he had said among the skeps a lifetime ago, to hold the rain to the root. "You were right," she said. "It cups. My copy was flat. I am frequently right. It is my least endearing quality." He drew her up, and Perpetua came pelting back to report that she had found the crossest beetle in the world, and named it after her aunt, who was coming Tuesday and would be delighted, and Clara Linden, who was Clara no longer only but the Duchess of an island she had reached entirely by mistake, stood in the honeyed gold of the evening with her portfolio under her arm. She still would not set it down. Some habits are the truest thing a person owns. And looked at the man and the child and the mended garden and the sea that had brought her to all of it against every asking, and found the sum, at last, came right. "Draw it before the light goes," the Duke said, and she opened the portfolio on her knee in the last of the sun. "The rain cup especially. You will only get it wrong from memory." "Then stand still," said Clara, and stop moving into a more flattering light, and behind them the child laughed, and the bees came home. If you have ever been carried somewhere you never meant to go, a wrong boat, a wrong turning, a wrong island entirely, and found against all sense that it was the one place you were ever meant to land, come and tell me about it by the fire in the comments. I do love to hear where the tide has taken you. And if Clara and her Duke kept you company tonight, do subscribe and stay a while, for there is always another story waiting on the next warm evening, and the kettle is always on.